We will now take one step back from our actual game and think more about our app as a whole. So, what do we need for our Angry Birds app so that it is actually complete? Well, it would be nice if we had a menu from which we could then maybe get to a level selection screen where we could load different levels with different layouts. To implement this structure of the app with the different scenes, which we will in SpriteKit use instead of different view controllers, is the goal of this and maybe the next videos. We will make some slight modifications to our fundamental project structure. And I will begin by creating 2 new scenes. As of now, we only have our game scene. And I now want to add one for the menu and one for the level selection. So let's right click on the scenes group and add 2 new files. They will both be Cocoa Touch classes and both be subclasses of SK Scene. The first one will be called menu scene for our menu screen. So let's create it and right away exchange the import to be SpriteKit so that we don't have any errors lingering around. I'll then repeat the process to create yet another new SK Scene subclass, and this time I will call it level scene. Again, I will import SpriteKit instead of UIKit. Alright, we have 3 scenes now, so now it's time to make sure that we always show the right one when we are navigating in our app. All of our scenes are actually presented in one single view controller, and that is our game view controller, which we have here. If we take a look, we can see that we just in the viewDidLoad method cast our view as a SpriteKit view and then present the game scene from the SKS file in our view. To be able to switch between scenes and present new scenes from anywhere in our app later on, however, I will probably not want to have this in the viewDidLoad method, since this just gets called once the app loads and our initial view controller loads. From within my scenes, like the game scene for example, I would then be unable to access this code to maybe present another scene. Therefore, we are going to use a protocol delegate pattern that will allow us to create a sort of scene manager that we can access from anywhere within our app. To begin, I will create a new protocol right above the GameViewController class, and it will be called Scene Manager Delegate. The protocol definition will contain 3 methods, one for presenting each of our scenes. So we will have a method called presentMenuScene, one method called presentLevelScene, and finally a method presentGameScene. This last method will now also get a parameter called level with the type integer, and this will later on allow us to create different levels for our game scene. Now that I have this protocol in place, I want to make my class GameViewController conform to this protocol, which I will do right below the class itself, where I will add extension, GameViewController, and then after a colon, adopt the Scene Manager Delegate protocol. As soon as I do that, I will get an error, since we do not have the protocol methods implemented. I can either type them out manually, but I could also select this fix where it says add protocol stubs. And if I select this proposed solution, the 3 methods get added automatically. And I can then start implementing them. Before I implement them though, I will add another method to the extension, which is not part of the protocol. And this method will be called present, with a parameter scene of the type SKScene. This is a little better since as soon as we will have defined and initialized our scene, be it a game, menu, or level scene, we will present it pretty much the same way and can therefore encapsulate this in this present method to avoid duplicating a lot of code. This method will pretty much do what we did in ViewDidLoad. We will cast our sprite kit view and then use it to present a scene in it. So let's add this right away. We get a scene passed to the method, which we've initialized in one of the other three methods, and should now present it in our view. Therefore, I begin with the if-let statement from the ViewDidLoad method by writing if let view is self.view as skView, which is exactly how it is done in the template. If we now have our view here, I can again set the scale mode for our scene, which will of course be .resizeFill. And why that is important is something that we've already talked about. I can then say view.presentScene and present my scene in this view. I could also add debug information and such, but I will just add view.ignores sibling order with the value true to render our nodes efficiently. So we just set the scale mode, present the scene, and set this property. That's basically what happened in the ViewDidLoad method before. In the ViewDidLoad, we still have the initialization of the scene, which down in the extension is done in separate methods. But how are our scenes actually initialized? That is what we need to implement in the other three methods from our protocol. For menu and level, it's pretty easy, since we are not going to use SKS files for the two scenes, but implement all the layout in the Swift files and the appropriate classes. For the menu, for example, all I need to do is write let menu scene, which will be a menu scene instance. And as soon as I have this, I can already call present and pass the scene to show it in my view. And exactly the same can be done for the level scene, so a constant called level scene as a new level scene instance that we then show in our view by calling present and passing level scene. For the present game scene for level method, it is slightly different. We will begin by defining the name for our scene, and that should be the name of the appropriate SKS file containing the visuals for our scene. As of now, we only have this one file here, but it will change. So let's start by renaming our existing SKS file to GameScene1. We can then, in the game view controller, initialize the name for the SKS files with a constant called scene name set to game scene. And then we just append the level that we get passed to the method. So if we call present game scene for level 2, for example, the scene name will be GameScene_2. I can then try to initialize a game scene with this name by writing if let game scene is skScene, where I will pass the constant scene name as the name for my new scene. I will also want to cast this result as a game scene. If I can then initialize a valid skScene with the scene name constant, and it can also be casted as a game scene, I can work with it. And what do we want to do? Exactly. We will call the present method this time for our new game scene instance. Perfect. We now have a solid system in place to present different scenes from our game. And we can already test if this works by replacing the contents of our ViewDidLoad method. And instead of all of this code, I will just write present menu scene, which should present our first scene, which will later, of course, be the menu. But how do we get to another scene if I'm currently in a scene? That's a good question. To solve this, we will add a Scene Manager Delegate property to all 3 of our scenes. So let's begin in the menu scene, where I will add one property to my as of now empty scene. It will be a variable called Scene Manager Delegate, which will have the optional type Scene Manager Delegate. And I can then copy this property and add it in my level scene like so, and also in my game scene, where I will add it right at the top of my class, like so. I can then go back to the game view controller, where I can, for the menu, level and game scene, before presenting them, add a value for the Scene Manager Delegate property for each one of them. Let's start with the menu scene by writing menu scene.sceneManagerDelegate and setting it to self, so the game view controller itself. What does that mean? I can use this Scene Manager Delegate property in my menu scene to actually call the methods in my game view controller extension by, for example, calling Scene Manager Delegate .present level scene to get to the level selection. Let's add it to the other 2 as well. So for the level, we set level scene.sceneManagerDelegate to self. And finally, in the present game scene method, we will set GameScene.sceneManagerDelegate to self. With this structure in place, I can use the Scene Manager Delegate property in any scene to call these present scene methods in the game view controller. And with that, easily present other scenes if we need to. Now, to actually have a smooth way of triggering these scene transitions, we will now add a custom SpriteKit button class to our game, which we can use to maybe select a level in the level selection scene. How this button works and how we implement it is explained in an entire video, and we will now just add this button to our game to have this element available for us to use for different applications.